Well, hello, everyone. We previously recorded a podcast, which you'll hear soon on Monday, and we have that show for y'all in a couple seconds. But Tuesday, there was some pretty big breaking news in the world of the Carolina Panthers. Mike, can you lay it out for us?
Yeah, the Panthers placed three players on the non-football injury list. The big headliners are Taylor Moton and J.C. Horn. Jalen Gillaboo, a undrafted rookie cornerback, was also placed on the non-football injury list. The big news here is that Taylor Moton was diagnosed with a blood clot in his lung in late June, and he is expected, according to the team website, to miss regular season action. Now, J.C. Horn suffered a cut while training during the break between OTAs and training camp. He's expected to make a much faster recovery, is expected to take part in training camp at some point. But like Gillaboo, like Moton, he will start on the non-football injury list. Just so you know, if you're not familiar with the non-football injury list, guys can get taken off at any point during the off season, during the summer, ahead of the cut-down deadline on August 30th. Now, if they are on the NFI list past August 30th at 4 p.m., they will miss at least the first 4 games of the season. So that's something to watch, especially with Moton, who the Panthers have been pretty upfront with, saying that he is expected to miss regular season time. Alex, when you hear about these injuries, particularly Moton, what comes to mind?
What comes to mind is Monroe Freeling and Rasheed Walker. This was going to be the biggest training camp storyline, training camp competition that we would begin to witness later this week. Now that this is kind of an interesting prospect when you talk about like what that competition is going to look like. Are the Panthers going to give starter reps to Monroe Freeling on the right side of the line to begin training camp? Will Monroe start on the left and Rasheed start on the right? So those are those possibilities. Obviously, it goes without saying that we wish Taylor Moton a speedy recovery as well. And then, similar things when you talk about the cornerback room as well. We were talking about who is going to be that cornerback 3 behind J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson to start training camp. Well, that might be elucidated for us a little bit earlier than we expected. Mike, any additional thoughts?
Well, I think the natural idea is to put Freeling at right tackle. 1, because he's extremely athletic. 2, because you cross-trained him all the spring at left and right tackle. And you've already kind of nuzzled Rasheed Walker into that first team left tackle spot throughout OTAs and minicamp. So with him having 3 years of experience at the left tackle position, to just thrust him over to the right side doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, Freeling, who has mostly played left tackle during his career, is really interesting because he doesn't have like a baseline of a lot of experience anyway. So it's not like you're trying to break old habits or what have you. He's more of a multiple chess piece. And how many times have I brought this up since April? He reminds me of Lane Johnson, who is arguably the best right tackle of the last 20 years. So getting an athletic guy who can pass block, can get out in space, can improve the screen game, I think it behooves them to give him as many starting reps as possible. You have Brady Christensen and Stone Forsythe, 2 guys who have a lot of experience starting as safety nets there, but at least through the first 2 or 3 preseason games, you should give Monroe Freeling every starting rep he can, and to make Rasheed Walker better and more comfortable at that left tackle position, he should be next to Damian Lewis as much as humanly possible. So, in a way, this is awful for Taylor Moton, but it might benefit the long term for this team. And now, once Moton comes back, if Freeling's struggling, you move Moton back to right tackle, and then Freeling, you can reassess maybe during the bye week after the first 4 games and say, look, if Rasheed Walker isn't playing well, maybe you move Monroe Freeling the left tackle or what have you. It also has long-term ramifications to where if Monroe Freeling looks great at right tackle, maybe long-term you look at basically bringing back Ike Ekwonu on a cheap deal next year once he's fully recovered from patellar surgery. So this is an intriguing situation, but I think for the Panthers, they've kind of got to play it as not only a short-term, but a long-term play. And I think bringing back Brady Christensen was a masterstroke. He knows the offense. He knows all 5 positions. He can do all that stuff. But if you're planning to make him the backup right tackle or the backup swing tackle, what have you, it does kind of leave you again with a pretty rough guard backup situation, which I've touched on several times in this podcast and don't need to relitigate. Sorry, that's your word, Alex, not mine. So out of my mouth sounded weird. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think the Panthers cornerback group is about as good as it gets in the NFC South division. I like Will Lee. He played a lot on the outside during OTAs with the first team group, so I think he'll be accustomed to that. This really puts a highlight on Corey Thornton as the nickel corner. I think it gives Shaw Smith-Wade some more time for playing time, especially with the top group. And I'm really interested to see how this impacts Devontae Smith, because if Corey Thornton is for sure the first team nickel, maybe Devontae Smith sneaks in because Shaw Smith-Wade is playing more outside, just based on his experience in the defense. So something we'll keep a lot of close eyes on, and we'll be out there at training camp on Thursday. We'll talk to Dan Morgan on Wednesday. It's going to be an interesting week. It's going to be a really interesting week and a really interesting summer. And we'll continue on that note with the rest of our regularly scheduled podcast.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Processing Blue, where we process blue for you. I'm Alex Zietlow. He's Mike Kaye, and we cover the Carolina Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. Training camp begins this week in a few days. We can't wait to melt. Christopher Nolan is back. Mike is just trying to find his way home. Mike, how are you doing?
I think I am home in a very, very warm garage. Office, multi-purpose. But yeah, I'm excited, man. We're like, we're recording this on a Monday, but when this goes up on Wednesday, we'll be 24 hours away from training camp. So it just feels like it's real. And I cannot wait to watch dudes run around in pads and without pads. It's going to be great.
Do you think this training camp will be the greatest Western story ever told outside of the Odyssey? You know,
I don't know. I'm partial to Feifel Goes West, but
that's great. Okay, I kind of stumbled over my words there, but we're just gonna keep trucking along. So this is a really fun episode for everyone listening. We're gonna be building off of what we did last week, where we discussed who among the Carolina Panthers roster are locks to make the 53-man roster coming out of training camp. And we came up with 36 names. Some of y'all thought that was too few. Some of y'all thought that was just right. And I will get to those 36 names in a second. But if we have 36 players who are locks to make the roster, that means that there are 17 roster spots up for grabs. And that is what we will be discussing for the overwhelming majority of the podcast today. And we hope that you enjoy it as much as we do, because we kind of mostly agreed last week when we were kind of breaking down who is a lock to make this roster. But this week we definitely diverge a little bit more on our opinions. But just to keep us up to date, here are the 36 names that we claimed are locks to make the Panthers roster. And by locks, we mean, guys who are 90% or better, have a 90% or better chance to make the roster, barring trade or injury. Those 36 guys: Bryce Young, Kenny Pickett, Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, Tetairoa McMillan, Jalen Coker, Chris Brazzell, Xavier Legette, Tommy Tremble, Jatavian Sanders, Mitchell Evans, Ike Ekwonu, Monroe Freeling, Rasheed Walker, Damian Lewis, Luke Fortner, Robert Hunt, Taylor Moton. And then on defense, Mike is dancing in the background. And then on defense, we got Derek Brown, Turk Wharton, Lee Hunter, Devin Lloyd, Trevin Wallace, Jalen Phillips, Nick Scorton, Princely Uman-Mielen, J.C. Horn, Mike Jackson, Will Lee, Corey Thornton, Trayvon Merrick, Nick Scott, Lathan Ransom, and then your three specialists: Ryan Fitzgerald, J.J. Jansen, and Sam Martin. So those are the 36 guys. Mike, let's get into these other 17 spots. How do you want to structure it? Because, not all prospective players to make this roster out of these 17 are made equal.
Right. Yeah. So the way that I've set this up and the way we have set this up is we're looking at guys between 60 and 85% chance of making the roster, barring injury or trade. This, yeah, some of you might be like, well, you guys did 90% and up. What happened to the other 5%, like Alex? But I think I said on the podcast, like, the next closest guy was like Bobby Brown or Pat Jones at like 85%. So I felt like I'm sticking within the same realm, the same multiverse of what I was talking about last week.
The
So
player who has an 86 to 89% chance of making the team just doesn't exist.
Yeah,
In
basically.
this universe.
Sorry, tough scene. So we have 11 names here. Let's start off with the offense. Trevor Etienne, Bryson Tremaine, Brady Christensen, who, by the way, was added to the roster on Friday, Stone Forsythe, Sam Hecht, Alex's guy, clearly, Chandler Zavala. On defense, Bobby Brown, Thomas Incoom, Claudin Cherilus, Claude, if you know him, Pat Jones, and Zaki Wheatley. So, this list is important to factor in. It provides a third running back, a big wide receiver, potential backup left tackles and backup right tackles, Sam Hecht, Zaki Wheatley. So 6 of the draft picks range from about a 60 to 100% chance of making the roster. That's pretty much that's the normal. That's the norm. Then special teams aces / veteran backups like Incoom, Jones, Cherilus, and Bobby Brown. So let's talk about what's not on this list, right? There are with Ike Ekwonu being a part of that previous list, we both think that he will start the season on the PUP list. So that makes it 35. So 35 plus the 11, that's 46. So that's like 7 spots that are truly up for grabs based on the numbers that we are putting together. I think from my standpoint, Bryson Tremaine is going to be a really tough guy to supersede on this roster because he is arguably their second best special teams player. And frankly, when he did play on offense, he provided a spark when given the rock. He can play all 3 positions. Very smart guy from Stanford. That helps. If there is a guy that's injured, I could see him being the main backup at the Z or the slot position. I think he could thrive in a big slot scenario, similar to Jalen Coker. Brady Christensen, while I think he's pretty much at that 85% chance, we'll see how the injury impacts his play. I've spoken to his trainer, as we've documented at charlotteobserver.com. His surgically repaired right leg is actually performing better than his left leg, which is pretty wild, and he's way ahead of schedule on an Achilles recovery. Zavala last week I said had about a 60% chance of making the roster, so I'm staying true to my word here. I think Christensen probably pushes him down, but we want to stay consistent. We want to stay accurate. We want to be transparent on the Processing Blue podcast. And then guys that we talked about last week, Bobby Brown, Thomas Incoom, Claude Cherilus, Pat Jones, Zaki Wheatley, those are guys that are going to make the roster barring a massive drop-off in performance. I am interested to see how Bobby Brown's health kind of shapes together. He's had some training camp issues, or at least OTA issues over the last several times that we've been out there. Incoom had a procedure done that they didn't kind of clarify, but he seems to be good for camp. So, Alex, what do you make of this 11-man list? But also, what do you make of what's not on here?
Yeah, no, I think that this list rounds out who will make this team pretty nicely as far as what we know about this team so far right now. I think the one person that most people will kind of draw their eyes to is Bryson Tremaine. And I think that we can have a bit more of a robust discussion about him. The thing is that I don't think, yes, he is a wide receiver, but he can essentially be a special teams guy for all intents and purposes for why he is going to make this roster. Based on conversations that we've had with his coaching staff, based on just how generally Dave Canales values special teams. he was a surprise last year, and he won't be a surprise this year. And I just think that's interesting. We can go a little bit more in depth about the wide receiver room later on in the episode, but I think the Bryson Tremaine of it all is interesting, and his battle with Felipe Franks is something to keep watch of. Felipe Franks did not make this likely. Well, he wasn't on this likely list. Um, do you have a percentage of, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but do you have a percentage of what you would put Felipe Franks at?
I think that's a good question, and it was something that I think he's probably in that 50 to 59% range. Like, I
Okay.
do think he's got a good shot. The one thing that I always bring up with the first, or I guess the cut down deadline, is vested veteran status. When you make the week one roster as a vested veteran, you have the option of guaranteeing your contract. Guys on rookie deals, non-vested players, are subject to the waiver wire. So here's the thing: you can cut a guy like a David Moore, or Felipe Franks, or somebody of that ilk, and then bring them back later without risking them to the waiver wire. These guys who are on rookie contracts, a Jackson Kuwatch, an Aaron Hall, a Nick Samac, a Dante Smith, and so on, Jimmy Horn, they are waiver eligible, so somebody can just claim them and you have no shot of bringing them back and doing some mechanics with them. So that's why I'm kind of iffy on Franks. There are some other guys that are kind of like that. As I mentioned, David Moore, John Mechie could be one of those guys you'd consider. We'll talk a little bit more about the wide receivers later, but I think Frank's got a good shot, certainly better than James Mitchell, just because Felipe is so dynamic as a special teams guy. He was voted by the locker room as the 2024 MVP of special teams in our poll that we do every year. So I think he's got a great shot. I don't know if I would bet on him. Like, if you're 60%, it's pretty clear you're going to make the roster barring an implosion. Another guy kind of in that range is Shaw Smith-Wade, where it's like they're using him at safety. They kind of have moved on from him, at least on the surface, at nickel. You don't really know what he's going to be. He's had some busts in coverage, really smart player, but you wonder about how he is athletically compared to the rest of his competition. I'm going to give him probably like a 55% chance of making it. But I thought for this exercise, it made a lot of sense. There are guys that can be unseated. There are guys that this team has to watch for. And I've come up with an Underdog's watch list of about 4 guys that I think kind of makes sense. Before we get into that, though, Alex, like, what is your mindset towards that 59% and under crowd?
As mindset as in like who is on that list?
Yeah, I mean, technically there are a lot of guys on that list. I mean, Jimmy Horn's a guy.
I mean, my immediate heart goes to Damani Richardson.
No, of course.
I just can't believe that he hasn't graced this page. And Raheem Blackshear isn't with the Panthers anymore, so I guess I can't, stump for him either.
So, yeah.
No, but like Damani Richardson, I was just so convinced that he would have a contributing role on this team last year, and he had another good training camp. Day one of training camp, he picked off Bryce Young, and then just didn't establish himself on the roster throughout the season, and then was a practice squad guy by the end of the year. I still think the team likes him. Yeah, I don't think that they like him enough to play him. So there's that. But I don't think that they are actively trying to get him off the practice squad. Why are you looking like that?
They like him, but not to play him. They're like,
he's a good presence in the. He's a presence in the locker room. I mean, you can't deny the fact that his teammates like him. He seems to be likable in the locker room with his teammates. I'm tripping over my words today, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to like be where you are. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Instead of you asking what is your mindset towards 59 and below, or I don't even know what that means.
Sorry, it
Tell
was a
me,
bad question.
tell me what tell me what your underdogs are that you're looking at.
Okay. Feisty Alex on a Monday. So I've got a list of 4. You're not going to be surprised by 3 of them. And honestly, I probably should go in Nick Samac, of course, legend of the bit. Um, I think he's an NFL player, right? Like, I think when we watch this Hall of Fame game, there's going to be a lot of UFL level players in there. I think Nick Samac is an NFL level player. I'm interested to see what they do with him because you don't really keep 3 centers. I mean, it's kind of similar to keeping 3 catchers on an MLB roster. Some teams do that, but they would have to really kind of figure out a special teams role for him. We have seen him run down kicks. So maybe that. Aaron Hall, he's gotten a lot of buzz on the show. Friend of the program, just like Nick Samac. I just, I, I just, I don't see how LeBrian Ray and Jared Harrison Hunt have more appeal than Aaron Hall, and I guess that's kind of where I'm at. You know what I mean? Like, we've seen him out there. He's got good hands. He's working out with Derek Brown in the offseason. I think he's doing all the right things. He's a local guy. Maybe he doesn't play right away, but I think he's one of those guys where you're like, he makes sense to keep because of his upside and his potential. Devontae Smith, another undrafted rookie, I would give him and Hall the 2 highest percentage chances of making this roster of the undrafted class. We talked about the nickel position. We've talked about how much they need to kind of figure that out. I really think it's Devontae Smith for Shaw Smith Wade for that. One of those final DB spots. And that'll be really intriguing because they both can play safety. They both can play nickel. They both can play on special teams. Devontae Smith played a ton of special teams in college at Alabama. So he's interesting. Here's the one that I'm going to give you that might surprise you if you don't regularly read the Charlotte Observer. And I think you're going to agree with me on this one, Alex, because of what we've seen kind of behind the scenes. Jasim Reed is going to be a guy that we got to watch out for. He catches everything, like everything in practice. And I'm not saying like he's Chris Brazzle or he's whatever. I think if you're going to keep a 6th wide receiver, it's got to be somebody you can depend on his hands and his route running ability. I think he can play all 3 positions. I think he's going to get a lot of run in training camp, but also the preseason. He strikes me as this year's Bryson Tremaine, if that makes sense. What's your take on this list, Alex? Because I know, like me, you really like focusing on every man on the roster. Maybe this is a better question because my last question was terrible. What do you think about this 4-man group, and how would you rank all 4 of these guys in kind of their percentage chances of making this roster? You don't have to give me a percentage, but like, what do you think of the list?
I think the list is good. I think Nick Samac is I wouldn't go as far to say indispensable, but he plays a position that needs depth, and this front office really likes him. The Devontae Smith, Aaron Hall will learn a lot more about. I understand what you say about Jasim Reed. He did have a really good rookie minicamp, but he was still participating in rookie minicamp. He is playing in a very competitive wide receiver room for a second consecutive year. He didn't make the 53-man roster at the end of last year's training camp. So it's going to be an uphill battle for Jasim Reed. If I had to rank them, I would go Nick Samac, Devontae Smith, Aaron Hall are interchangeable, and then Jasim Reed at the bottom. And this kind of segues really well into the wide receiver discussion, a discussion that we've had several iterations of already, even before training camp begins. The locks on the roster for the wide receivers, we have 4 of them: Tedero McMillan, Jalen Coker, Chris Brazzle, Xavier Legette. Now you have 4 more wide receivers, or maybe even 5 more wide receivers in that mix, among them Bryson Tremaine, David Moore, Jimmy Horn, John Mechie, and now Jasim Reed. I just think that it's a little too crowded of a room for Dave Canales to take a chance on Reed, at least as it is right now. Particularly because David Moore had such a good offseason. And if David Moore is going to have an NFL career, it's going to be with Dave Canales this year. So I don't know how long you want to spend on this wide receiver discussion. We've talked about it a lot. But there's 9 guys going for maximum 7 spots, and I don't see Jasim Reed like kind of making that cut as of right now. But guess what? You said we didn't think Bryson Tremaine was going to be that guy last year either. So if he is going to be the Bryson Tremaine of this offseason, then that's possible in a Dave Canales system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about identifying somebody who is in a crowded room but can surprise you. And again, these are underdogs to watch. We didn't have them on our likelies list. We're not saying that they're going to make the roster. They're just guys, I think, that have a sub 50% chance of making the roster, but who could find themselves on the better end of that percentage total as the weeks go on. I do think we need to talk about the wide receiver position because we don't have David Moore, Jimmy Horn, or John Mechie on this list. And I think you can poke holes in each guy. So with David Moore, it's like you said, he's kind of a victim of his own loyalty. You know that he only wants to play for Dave Canales. So maybe it's like, well, cool, we don't need to guarantee his contract. Let's put him on the practice squad. You already saw in the last year's playoff game, they didn't rush him into action. He's good for the room. Maybe you have him as a player coach on the practice squad. That was something that they did with Jordan Matthews a few years ago, if you remember. Jimmy Horn doesn't play special teams. And I think the only way he can truly justify a roster spot, especially if they want to move Xavier Legette around a lot, Jalen Coker's healthy, he's going to have to show you something as a returner. And I think he will get those opportunities. It's just a matter of whether they trust him back there. Because last year they really did by their actions. And then with Mechie, it's like, if he's the 6th wide receiver and he doesn't really play special teams beyond a couple of kickoffs, like, how do you justify that? Alex, in your opinion, like, what is the disconnect here with that 6th wide receiver spot? Like, who do you think is the favorite of the 3? And then also, like, is there a scenario where all 3 of these guys don't make it?
I don't see that there's a scenario that all three guys do not make it. I think of the 3, David Moore has the best chance. And to the John Mechie, Bryce Young believers, that might be kind of strange to hear, but as much as we've written about John Mechie having a lot of upside as a short yardage, yard after catch runner and producer, he hasn't had the opportunity or just hasn't shown it prolifically in recent years. So I think that is, I just think that's the reality when you're talking about a guy like John Mechie. Here on the Processing Blue podcast, we're probably not as high on Jimmy Horn as the rest of Panther Nation is or seems to be, at least about when we go online and kind of just take a pulse of what the fan base is thinking and saying. Jimmy Horn just has to scratch out a role as a returner somehow. He has to find a way to be valuable beyond a gadget player, beyond someone who can just go in motion and impact the run game in that way, who can find touches outside of, jet sweeps and stuff like this. If he can find a way to do that, great. It's going to be very difficult, particularly as you got to give Xavier Legette as much development as possible this offseason, particularly as you want to evaluate what Chris Brazzell can do and if he can impact this offense immediately. It just is going to be a tough sled. What about you, Mike? Who of those 3 do you think will make the team? And is there a scenario where none of them do?
So it's funny, and I think I've brought this up on the podcast before. I won't name the person that brought this up, but a few years ago, we were in Spartanburg, and somebody came up to me and they said, you're getting a lot of hate for saying Shi Smith doesn't have a shot of making the roster. He ended up not making the roster. It's whatever. But I feel like Jimmy Horn has become the new Shi Smith in that he's got a groundswell of fans. And I think the fan base is much higher on him than the staff is. Now, that's not to say the staff doesn't love him. I'm just saying, like, the difference of opinion between the writers and fans and then probably people in the organization is a little bit different. You would have seen a lot more of him last year if it wasn't. And so I think it's an interesting thing. Of the three, I would keep Jimmy, mainly because
interesting.
I do think there is something to the gadget stuff. I like Jimmy. I do. It's a matter of how creative you can be with him. Also, again, vested veterans. David Moore is a vested veteran. I can get him on the practice squad. John Mechie, I'm not going to be competing for his services. I think Jimmy's going to have some interest from creative teams. Like this isn't how you should operate, but I could see Dan Morgan and Brent Tillis and Dave Canales being like, if we put this kid on waivers, he's going to be picked up by San Francisco or Los Angeles or Green Bay or Jacksonville, and they are going to turn this kid into a do-everything type offensive weapon, and we're going to have a face. I don't think you should operate that way, but I do think there is something to having guys that you think have special traits and they perform just well enough in the preseason where you're like, yeah, they're going to be healthy and active for a bit, but does it make sense to get rid of an intriguing player, right? And so I think that's how they could justify that. I don't think we've seen enough to say, like, he is a guy that should be likely to make the roster, but I do think there is something to be said about Jimmy Horn's intangibles in a way, which is funny because you look at Shi Smith, and Shi Smith was a proven returner. And even to me, it was like, I don't know how he makes this inevitably 2-15 team. And then he never played in the league again. So, I don't know. But then again, Shi Smith got 2 years. Jimmy Horn's had like half a regular season to kind of study. If I had to handicap it, I would say Jimmy Horn, then David Moore, then John Mechie. I think John Mechie is going to be one of those guys where he's going to have to outperform Leggett and Tremaine more so than he's going to have to outperform the guys below those two. Because if you're justifying him, he's not going to be a regular special teams player. You need to justify it by saying, like, cool, well, maybe we should move on from Leggett and have him be a main look at the Z position, right? Like, if Leggett absolutely bombs and you're like, we got to shop him for somebody, which I don't think they're eager to do, by the way. But after a few weeks of training camp, if Mechie's lighting it up because his connection with Bryce Young is there, well, maybe that leads to some movement there. John Mechie, to me, is a guy that is almost in lockstep with the status of where Bryson Tremaine and Xavier Leggett are, because he's competing to be one of those top 5 receivers, not the tag-along 6 or 7 guy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that does make sense. So one part of our locks episode that was one position group that was particularly shallow was the inside linebackers group. We only talked about Trevin Wallace and Devin Lloyd. We only considered them locks among that position. Yes, we included Claudin Cherylus on this likely kind of roster. He also has a lot of special teams upside. Do you want to talk about Jackson Kuwatch? Because you've written about him a couple times. He's a draft pick for the Panthers this year. And I know 7th round draft picks are far from, guarantees of making the team. But from your conversations with players and from your just watching him, you seem pretty high on him.
I am high on him. I think he is a little slender for an NFL linebacker. Like, he looks like a guy that, came from Miami of Ohio, right? Like, he does not look like although he did start at Ohio State. I'm interested to see how he does. I think him not being part of this list is more so my thought process on if there was one position to add to now, I think it would be inside linebacker. There's like a lot of notable names: Bobby Arukier, if I'm pronouncing that right, Kenneth Murray. Like there are starting level players that if Trevin Wallace does not take the bull by the horns as a starter, I could see them looking into adding a linebacker. That said, though, like I think Kuwatch versus Bam Martin Scott's really interesting. We don't have Bam Martin Scott on this list, which in hindsight, maybe we should have because they do really like him, but then they didn't spend a draft pick on him and he's already in his mid-20s. Do you look at Kuwatch and you say, this guy was a one-year wonder. What if we just gave him a redshirt year and had him like kind of sit and learn? Big Keekly guy. Let's see what he does. Like to me, the two guys that I'm like really paying attention to in the three guys that I'm really paying attention to in the Hall of Fame game, if they're playing, Monroe Freeling, Sam Hecht, and Jackson Kuwatch. Those are the three guys. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but like Lee Hunter is probably going to be rotationally in there. I don't know how much he'll play. I also don't know how much he'll rotate, whatever. But I think Kuwatch is a guy that needs to get off to a very strong start. I think Zaki and Will Lee, just based on their positions, they're going to get a little bit more of a landing strip. But Kuwatch is a guy that I think needs to have a very strong preseason to make it over someone like Bam Martin Scott, who they very clearly like, Claude Cherilus, who's been here for 3 years, and forces them to not go out in free agency and say, hey, look, we need to upgrade this entire group next to Devin Lloyd.
How many inside linebackers did Dave Canales keep last year?
Off the top of my head, it was Roseboom, Wallace, Cherilus, Bam Martin Scott, Chris Barnes was on the practice squad.
Yeah, Chris Barnes was on the practice squad, which was weird. I'm trying to look it up right now.
I think they'll keep 4 to 5, but I also think you also have to factor in the math of the outside linebacker.
They kept 4 last year: Christian Rosen, Trevin Wallace, Claude, and Bam Martin Scott.
Because, like, to me, you've got to look at what you got at outside linebacker. So we have 4 guys, or we had three guys guaranteed locks, and then on top of this, we have 2 guys on this list as likelies. So that's 5 guys right there. If they keep 6 outside linebackers, they're keeping 4 inside linebackers at most. So it's like you've got to kind of figure that one out. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm intrigued. I think Jackson Kuwatch is an interesting guy. He checks off a lot of boxes as far as like the athletic traits are concerned, but he is a one-year wonder from college, which have historically not done particularly well here. But he's a 7th round flyer, and if you put him on the practice squad, maybe that's what happens. I know a lot of people at the East-West Shrine game are pretty high on him. But yeah, no, I think to put a bow on Kuwatch and our Kuwatch list, I think he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of ink because he plays a position that this franchise very clearly has a history with. If things work out and he becomes like a steal and moves his way up the depth chart, I think that's all great. I think Trevin Wallace is not necessarily on the most solid ground as far as starting goes. I think Claude Cherilus is going to push him. I think Bam Martin Scott might get some looks. And so if that's the case, Jackson Kuwatch could, Bryson Tremaine his way up the depth chart, and that'd be very interesting.
Bryson Tremaine already getting like a trade.
Yeah, man, the Bryson Tremaine show.
So according to this list, there are 36 locks, 11 likelies.
But Icky is like
Wanu being on PUP, so let's go 35 plus.
And then Turk Wharton could start on PUP, so it's like 7 to 8 positions that are up for grabs, and that's normal for a training camp.
7 to 8 positions are up for grabs, but some are going to be specifically at the inside linebacker spot, specifically at the wide receiver spot. So it's not just a completely wide open race. But I think we named through the course of last week's episode and this week's episode, I think we named every single player who could possibly make this team. Realistically, I mean, so I think that's a pretty thorough job. The Jasim Reed piece was interesting. I don't think many people are expecting that. So if that comes to fruition, you know where you heard it. You know where you heard it first.
We process blue for you. That's the goal.
That's right. Okay, Mike, is there anything else that we should get to before we head on out of here?
Yeah, Alex and I are doing this fun series. I love collaborating with Alex because Alex just his way with words. You know, they say Mr. A to Z. They're all about he's all about the wordplay. It's called Making the Case, and has nothing to do with my last name. Where we've talked about the center battle, the left tackle battle, the wide receiver battle, and by the time this runs, the cornerback 3 battle, or like the nickel battle. And I think it's kind of a fun series. It's kind of a way to just kind of see. It's not really as much debate as like why this would make sense if this guy got it over this guy. Nice little discussion there. Make sure you sign up for Axis Panthers. Everybody's favorite Panthers newsletter comes out every Monday. Alex has got the wheel this coming Monday right after camp. You'll get some behind the scenes features, exclusive analysis, and much more. And just stay tuned with us. I think we do training camp as well as anybody in the league, and I think you will get all the goods with Alex and I trading off notebooks throughout the summer, as well as doing awesome features. Now's the time to subscribe to the Charlotte Observer because we're running deals out the craziness. And yeah, I mean, keep in touch with us on social media. You know where to find us based on if you're watching this. You can see our ats. And yeah, I'm very excited about training camp. I think this is going to be a great summer.
Yeah, let's do it. And here we go. Thanks, as always, for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
I just noticed one of my vinyls is crooked. That's a wrap, Zach.